Okay, I am here with Justine Moore today, who is an ADHD nutritionist. So thank you, Justine, for joining me on our podcast, Nourish Kids podcast. So before we do get started, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this, going down this nutrition pathway?
Sure. Hey, everybody. So it kind of started probably about almost 13 years ago. So before I had my children, I was working as an environmental scientist. I had a really keen interest in why things happen the way they are, that kind of thing. Had my kids, and then they just started having a few health issues. So my eldest daughter, when she was young, she probably about 8-9 months, she sort of had failure to thrive, and a few other struggles just with her sleep and things like that. And at that time, thankfully, a friend put me on to an integrative doctor. So we went and saw the integrative doctor. And she did sort of, and an integrative doctor sort of looks a bit more deeply. So they kind of asked, well, why are these issues going on, rather than kind of just trying to address the surface of them. So through that, we did some testing. She prescribed some things like probiotics, and we saw a really big turnaround in her health. But it wasn't until a couple of years later, and when my son was about 3, so at that stage I had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, that he actually developed quite severe behavioural issues. So he kind of went from a pretty fun-loving boy to being angry most of the time, having big emotional meltdowns, very hyperactive. We had big issues with his sleep. So he just could not wind down at night and go to sleep. And then often once he got to sleep, he'd wake during the night. And it kind of threw our world upside down. So I kind of went to then having to spend most of my days sort of having to manage his behaviour and just support him in that. And it had a really big impact on our family. It had a big impact on the girls and a big impact on my husband and I, because we were really struggling to know how to support him and help him through that. And through that process, I just had a light bulb moment one day. So we'd started to pursue looking at things with my doctor, and she was suggesting that we look at actually maybe getting a diagnosis for him, because things were pretty full on. And she was suggesting things like ADHD, maybe oppositional defiance disorder, because of kind of the symptoms he was having. But we were out one day, we took a friend to this really nice chocolate cafe in Canberra, and I got the kids a little baby chino with a sort of chocolate bear that came with it. And within 10 minutes, my son was literally climbing the walls. He was angry. And it was like this light bulb moment where I just went, oh my gosh, I think he's reacting to foods. And I thought, wow, I wonder if that's part of the picture. So thankfully, I'd had a friend who had done an elimination diet, which is called the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital elimination diet, sometimes referred to as fail-safe. So I went to her and said, look, I think he's reacting to foods and it might be part of what's going on for him. So I jumped in, we did the elimination diet, and within 3 weeks of him being on the elimination phase of that diet, he was like a different kid. And most of those symptoms we were struggling with were really minimal. So still there, but just really minimal. And I was like, oh my gosh, here we are. He's obviously got some pretty severe food intolerances. So we then started the challenges, which is the next phase. You reintroduce the foods. But we hit a really major problem, because he then started reacting majorly to everything we tried to reintroduce. So the issue with that was we were kind of stuck on this pretty limited diet and didn't really know where to go. And that was fine in the sense that we could use that limited diet, the elimination diet, to manage his symptoms and sort of support him. But we didn't really know how to move forward from there. So thankfully, my GP at the time, she knew all that had been going on, and we'd been journeying with her through this. And she actually suggested that those food intolerances that he had could be linked to some gut issues, so that perhaps his gut wasn't really functioning optimally, and that's why he wasn't able to kind of process those foods in the way that you would expect. I mean, you kind of expect you should be able to give your kid an apple, and that's a healthy thing, right? And that
absolutely.
Yeah. But that would cause hyperactivity.
Wow.
So thankfully, she suggested it was a particular dietary protocol, which is a gut healing protocol called GAPS. So I jumped in, I read the book, and I just knew that we had to give it a go from the perspective of just something that would bring long-lasting change for him and healing in his body. Mm-hmm. And so we jumped into GAPS, and again, within sort of 3 weeks to a month of doing that, he was like a different child. And then he just went from strength to strength. Like, it wasn't all straightforward. It was up and down. The healing journey always is. But once on healing his gut, it kind of helped his body to then be able to actually deal with all those amazing foods that you want to give your children, right? You want to give them fruits and vegetables and things like that. Yeah. So we were really fortunate that that he healed beautifully doing that, and all of those symptoms we'd been dealing with actually disappeared. And that was just like a revelation to me, and I was amazed at that. And also at that time, I was part of a few Facebook groups and things like that, and just with my girlfriends, I was really aware we weren't the only ones going through this kind of thing, that lots of people were struggling with their kids having struggles that maybe we didn't have when we were growing up. And so something stirred in me, and I just had a real heart to want to support and help others. And so I decided to study nutrition. So first of all, I became an integrative health coach, and then I went on to become a clinical nutritionist, and I absolutely loved that journey. A big part of how I work is it's really important for me to understand why. So why, if there's health issues going on, well, why? Let's try and work out what's the root cause, what's going on underneath. Mm-hmm. And also something that someone said to me when we were really struggling was, it was this saying that was, you've been assigned to this mountain to show others how it can be moved. And that was just something I felt really deeply and kind of propelled me on. And so that's why, the why behind why I became a clinical nutritionist.
Awesome. What a story. And there's so many ins and outs that we could go through during that story. One that I wanted to pick out, and find it really hard with restrictive diets and children, and I'm guessing your son might have been school age by the time you were doing these elimination diets. Did you have any kickback from him, or, how did he attend weekend gatherings or birthday parties or anything? Did he feel on the out, or was it just the flow of the journey that just got you through?
Look, I think we were pretty fortunate at that point. He was only 3 when we did that. So obviously you've got a lot more control about what they're eating. And he was going to preschool at that point, and we provided the food and things. So he just kind of ate whatever mum gave him, kind of thing. I think it was really tricky when it came to birthday parties and things like that. That was really hard. But I think I just tried to help the kids to understand, particularly him, to understand why we were doing what we were doing, and as best that I can, as best you can explain that to a 3-year-old. But yeah, so there was a bit, I think it was really birthday parties that were the trickiest things, and functions, things like that. Yeah.
And where you were then when he was 3 compared to what foods he's allowed to have now is that he's got a lot more variety in his diet now. Is that so? It's not like it's forever during this elimination and gut healing stage. It was just a short amount of time. Yeah. So now he's a lot older. Does he still have these symptoms?
He hasn't got any of those symptoms that he had. So we were really fortunate that for him, look, this is not the case for everybody. And we know this even from the research that it's not food, and maybe food intolerances aren't necessarily the base cause for all behavioural issues or all things that are going on for kids. But certainly for him, that was his root cause. And so once we addressed that, all of those issues disappeared, and he is a healthy, thriving 16-year-old. He can eat whatever he wants. We do tend to, having a mum as a nutritionist, we do tend to eat pretty whole foods, and he really loves that. He plays quite a high level of sport, and so he's really conscious of what he puts in his body and wants to fuel his body really well, which helps. But yeah, it's not the end of the story going on one of those elimination diets. There's a lot you can do.
Okay, amazing. So that's definitely your reason why it was your son and his symptoms, and you've tried the food coaching to start with, and then you did your clinical nutrition, and now just recently you've just finished your master's, and
Yeah.
you've gone on, probably because of your son, to specialise in ADHD nutrition. So can you tell us some of the things that come up in your recent thesis about some contributing factors to ADHD? Why, or some of the latest stats, why it has been increased? Especially, you mentioned that this is stuff that you didn't see growing up, but now you see it quite a lot.
Yeah, you do. And look, I think ADHD is the most common neurodevelopmental issue affecting kids. It's anywhere up to worldwide, I think about 10%, up to between 8 and 10%. And now with many more adults being diagnosed as well, that's about 2.5% as well. Look, I think the rates of increase are highly debated. I think they say, a lot of people suggest that it's just due to increased people becoming much more aware, and even for adults that maybe they've sort of masked symptoms for years, and then maybe going through menopause or something like that, they can't mask anymore, and those symptoms sort of become more prominent and affect their lives. But I do think as well that when we get on in a little while to maybe just talking about some of the contributing factors, I think we've got a lot more of those going on now. So a lot of those things that we know can potentially contribute to ADHD and ADHD symptoms are much more significant now. So whether that be just the growth in the consumption of ultra-processed foods, the growth in the consumption, growth in things like pesticides or screens or things that affect sleep. So lots of those things have increased as well. So the potential for ADHD symptoms to increase is there as well. So maybe we're just seeing, some more of those things come out and in children as well.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. So do you just work with children, or you work with adults as well?
I do work mostly with children, but I do work with adults as well. And mostly because, I've had some adults come to see me. And also we'll talk later about a story just about a family that came to see me. And it was actually, the dad has ADHD and so do his kids. And he was sort of coming to see me about his kids, but we actually ended up working with him first because that was actually the priority, to actually get him functioning and thriving in how he was operating and how his body and brain were working, so that it could support his kids better. So I do work with both kids and adults as well.
Yeah. Amazing. And once you get that whole holistic approach happening at home, that filters down to the children as well.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the food angle and how some of these foods and maybe some of these ingredients in food can actually contribute to ADHD symptoms?
Yeah, sure. So the thing with food is that we know that, so the thing with foods is it's quite interesting. Okay, there's actually quite a lot of research out there, which I was really amazed actually at how much research I came across in terms of food and ADHD. So in terms of risk of developing ADHD, we know that it's double when people are consuming a diet that's high in processed, ultra-processed foods, high in sugars, high in fats, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that, and the reason for that is what they believe the mechanisms going on there are, that consuming those foods which are generally high in calories but low in nutrients. And so what they believe happens is it creates nutrient deficiencies in the body. Now, nutrients and amino acids from things like proteins are essential for neurotransmitter production. So then we produce the neurotransmitters we need, which affects brain function. So that's one of the ways we believe that operates. If we look at something like sugar, so the research shows sugar doesn't cause ADHD, but it does affect symptom severity. So we know from studies that the more sugar you consume, the greater the symptom severity can be. So that's sort of one type of food. Another one, so studies done on artificial colours and preservatives. So there was this really interesting study done where they actually gave children, so it was a mix of children with ADHD and children without ADHD. They gave them a mix of artificial colour and a preservative. And what was really interesting was that every single one of those all of those children actually showed some symptoms that are usually associated with the ADHD, like hyperactivity, impulsivity, some emotional regulation issues. So that was really fascinating. But there also have been done some other studies, so quite a lot of studies looking at things like artificial colours, flavours, preservatives, that kind of thing. And the summary of that research, there was a researcher called Julia Rucklich, and she said that based on all that research, we can be pretty sure that round about 8 to 10% of children with ADHD react to artificial food colours. So now, sometimes when you kind of think about that, like 8 to 10% isn't necessarily a lot, but when you think in Australia there's over 250,000 kids who have ADHD, that's over 20,000 children who we know would probably benefit significantly, and it would potentially reduce their symptoms a lot by just taking out artificial colours as well.
Wow, that's a big difference. And I know, like in our family, that's how we got started on this health journey, a bit similar to you and my son's behavioural issues. And as soon as we removed those artificial ingredients and colours and preservatives, almost instantly overnight, we noticed a shift in his behaviour.
Yeah, definitely. So,
and with the parents that I work with, I don't know if it's in the too hard basket or there's not enough education around how to make those simple swaps, because they think, oh my God, I'm not cooking everything from scratch. But there's certainly items available at the supermarket that don't have these additives and preservatives in them that is still that quick item that can still support a child's health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if have you come across the app Supermarket Swap?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really fantastic app that actually helps you make those simple swaps. So we all love convenience, right? We all want to have those things that we can just buy to have in the pantry that are easy for kids' lunchboxes, or just for when our children need snacks. I think that's a really amazing app, because for almost every single snack you can think of, there's an alternative that is completely additive free. Which is amazing. It's just that we just don't know where to find them. So that's where an app like super valuable and can help you on that journey of just starting to swap those out.
Yeah, excellent. And I know it is a subscription app, but if you follow her on Instagram, she shares so much free information on there as well. So that's a really good place to get started.
Absolutely, it is.
So, Justine, when you work in clinic with these children or families, is there a one-size-fits-all approach, or how do you tackle these symptoms? Like, where do you first start?
Look, when I start working with a family, I really like to you'll probably get a few questionnaires, and they're really just around what are your current symptoms as they relate to your ADHD symptoms. And often ADHD doesn't sit on its own. There's often other things going on alongside that. So whether that be anxiety or sleep issues, emotional regulation, that kind of thing. So I'm pretty keen to understand what's going on for you, what's going on for your child. Then I want to have a look at diet and just understand what your current diet is. I also want to understand gut health. And so I've got a pretty comprehensive gut health questionnaire that I do, because it's quite important in the way I approach things to understand if there's some significant gut things going on underneath as well. And then I just want to know where you're at, what would you like? What are the outcomes that you'd like to see, and what do you feel ready for in terms of change? And we can either step through it really slowly, step process of actually thinking about things. So the other thing that's really important that I do as well is there's some blood testing that I suggest to look for nutrient deficiencies, because we know that nutrient deficiencies are incredibly significant when it comes to ADHD. So we usually then, I get all of that information back in, and then we actually come up with a plan that's absolutely tailored to you, where you're at, how fast you want to move, what you'd like to change, and we step it through and walk it through together.
Yeah, amazing. And do you find that there's like some go-to supplements that you're regularly prescribing, to your clients? Like, is there like these common deficiencies in ADHD in particular?
Absolutely. So you find things like even something like iron, that, over 80% of children with ADHD, in comparison to kids who don't have ADHD, over 80% of kids with ADHD have iron deficiency. And we know from the research that iron deficiency can explain up to 35% of symptom severity. So that's just one simple example. But we also know some of the really big ones are things like zinc, magnesium, vitamin D, and some of the B vitamins are really crucial as well. And so I want to know if they're sort of lying beneath the surface, because often if we address those, we can get some really significant shifts in symptomatology, and get some really big improvements quite quickly. There's other supplements as well. This is what amazed me with the research that I did for my master's thesis. Was I asked the question, are there other ways, and is there an evidence base to addressing ADHD naturally? And I was blown away, because there is so much research, and it goes back sort of 30, 40 years. And there's lots of actual natural products. So it might be something like saffron, or there's this other amazing pine bark extract called pycnogenol, which has amazing studies behind it for ADHD. And they find that actually it has just as much benefit as stimulants for reducing ADHD symptoms. So we've got an amazing toolkit to work with here. And so what we're going to do is actually just trying to match those supplements and things with symptoms, and actually get the best mix of things to support your body and your brain. Yeah.
Amazing. And so when families go on this journey, do they start to see an improvement in symptoms like in the first week, or is it something that the journey needs to take a good 2 months to 6 months, or what are you finding in clinic when you work with these patients?
So I guess it all depends. So it all depends a little bit on the approach that we're taking. But like I said, if we were doing an elimination diet, if that's the route that we decided to take, within 3 weeks you can see some really big shifts in symptoms. It's the same with some of the supplements, like I mentioned, like saffron or pycnogenol. You can see some changes within sort of a month. Some pretty significant changes. Some of the nutrient deficiencies take a bit longer. So something like omega-3s, which are really, there's just a wealth of research behind those and how they can support the brain functioning with ADHD. That can take a little longer. That can take quite a few months to get to. You'll see improvements, but to get to kind of your maximum improvement might take about maybe 4 to 6 months. So it just sort of depends on what approach you're taking, but you can see some changes really quite quickly, which is quite exciting when you get started, and quite motivating.
Yeah. And do you find that kids are quite receptive to want to change, or are they like their certain amount of foods that they like to eat, or do you just like slowly say, okay, so instead of this for breakfast, we're just going to pair it with something else, like add something else in there for a little bit of protein or your omegas?
Yeah, that's right. Look, I think something I'm really passionate about is actually helping kids understand why. So I think, as a parent, we can tell them that we're going to make these changes. But I think taking them along the journey as well, and sort of understanding, and maybe, and I remember conversations even with my kids when they were really little and we were going through this process of actually just saying, well, you know how you feel really angry and then you really struggle because then you want to, you know, hit your sisters or whatever. Well, what we're doing is we're trying to actually just work out, you know, are there some foods that make that worse or what's going on? And so we're just going to do this for a little while to try and work that out. And then we're going to work out which foods make your body work the best. So I guess it's a bit of a process. And I think sort of taking kids along the journey and also working with each family where they're at. So if for a family that means jumping in, some families are ready. They're like, we want to jump into an elimination diet or even into a healing diet like GAPS, or there's other diets like the ketogenic diet that actually have some really strong research behind them now for ADHD. They may want to go there, but if they want to actually just step it out slowly, then the kids can go on the journey as well. And they can be involved, get them involved. So with what you have to work with in terms of foods or options, actually get them involved in that. So, you know, go to the shops and use the supermarket swap app and say, oh, look at this one. This one looks like a great one. You know, it hasn't got any of those additives that we know can make you feel a bit yuck or so why don't we try that and see if you like it. So I think, yeah, just working with everyone where they're at and taking kids along the journey as well.
Yeah, amazing. Excellent. So some of the clients that you work with, you mentioned that you've got some success stories of some clients that you've worked with. So can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so I was talking before about iron and just how significant that can be. So, and it's so common in kids with ADHD and adults for that matter as well. And so I had a family come to me. Their child had recently been diagnosed, about 7 years old. They hadn't gone the medication route yet. They were not keen to do that, mostly because their child was incredibly creative and they were worried about the stimulants or other medications actually affecting that. And so they wanted to just look at some other options. So we went through that process I talked about before. We looked at we did some blood tests to look for nutrient deficiencies. We looked at gut. We looked at food. And one of the things that really stood out was they were incredibly iron deficient. So the very first thing that we did was actually, first of all, increase their consumption of iron-rich foods, and then also add in a supplement. And within about 3 months, that was the only thing we did at first because the family just had a bit of stuff going on that meant they couldn't make any big dietary changes or things like that at the time. So we just started slow. They noticed massive differences, and there were differences so in terms of just reduction in all ADHD symptoms. So, and with ADHD, you want to get sort of your ferritin levels potentially up to about 70. So often for kids, they can be down as low as 4 or 10, wow, which is really low. So, but for optimal levels, we're talking getting up to something like 70. And I like to track those. We can do that through an omega-3 test. And so what we actually found was, that's omega-3, so I've just jumped onto something completely different. Sorry, we track it with bloods.
Sorry, Justine, for that interruption. Back to your story, you were just going through the blood tests that you can get for iron.
Yeah, so we just want to track that along the way and actually see what's happening in the body. But like I said, for this little boy, it was quite astounding actually. Once we got his iron levels up to close to optimal, the family noticed massive shifts in his ADHD symptoms. So really in a really positive way. And also he actually started performing better at school. So that was amazing, not just in terms of impulsivity and things like that. He actually was getting better grades. So that was quite amazing. Now, it's not always that simple, but it just actually taking a deeper look and actually understanding what's going on beneath the surface that might be driving some of these ADHD symptoms and particularly symptom severity. And then the other one referred to earlier was just a dad who came to me because of 3 children with ADHD. He also had ADHD, and he he wanted me to look at his children. But as we got talking, I suggested to him that maybe we actually start with him. Which we did. And so we sort of uncovered a few gut issues and also a few nutrient deficiencies and things. But where we started with him was actually just starting to reduce the consumption of ultra-processed foods. And then eventually, so over the course of about 6 months, he's actually moved into more of a ketogenic diet. That was just as we sort of got talking, and we realised that was something that really resonated with him. He felt really happy with that kind of approach. And then also we've added in a couple of supplements as well. But he has noticed just significant change in how he's feeling, in his emotional regulation. And that was one of his biggest issues. He came because he found that because of his own dysregulation and his own ADHD symptoms, he was finding it hard to support his kids. So by actually supporting him first, he's now he's just astounded. He just feels like, right, well, I want this for all of my kids. And so we're just now starting to look at, and he's been making some shifts within the family as he's been going along as well, dietary wise. But yeah, we'll start to look specifically at the children as well. But that was really significant, and that's been quite life-changing for him in terms of actually just being able to function and show up for his kids in a way that he wasn't able to before.
Yeah, amazing. It's so good. And it's so relatable that he can now understand what his kids are going through. Absolutely. And it's going to have that big flow-on effect just working with him first, right through to the kids. Amazing, Justine. You're doing such great work. I'd love to keep chatting with you. For those that want to reach out to Justine, where can we find you, and how can people reach out to you?
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram at adhd.nutritionist.justine. I'll also get Vic to maybe post some more contact details in terms of emails and phone number. But you can PM me, you can give me a call, and we can chat and work out if we feel like it's a good relationship we can move forward with in terms of supporting you. Yeah,
I like your two client studies that you've shared with us. It could just be one thing, like working on iron, and you can get those results through a blood test and just work on that one thing and already notice such a change in that behavior. So amazing. It's not like this big, oh my God, it's too difficult. I can't have 10 different supplements for my child, or I can't change their diet, and I don't have time to cook. But you do. You just simplify it and you just make it easy, and you meet families where they're at, which I think is fantastic. Absolutely. So, Justine, thanks again for your time today. I look forward to maybe chatting to you a bit further in detail about the GAPS protocol and some other things in the future. So thanks very much.
So much, Vic.